Welcome to the Heroes of Reality podcast, a podcast about the game of life and the hero's journey we all experience. Let's jump in with our host, Dylan Watkins, as he introduces today's guest.
Welcome, adventurers. Dylan here. And on today's podcast, I have Dr. Dave Hester. He's inspired to enrich humanity's experiences. His background is in mental health counseling, wellbeing engineering, behavioral research, executive coaching, and curating new technologies for improving well-being. In addition, he is the guides director for lifeguides.com, an employee benefits company using peer-to-peer support for everyday challenges. Dr. Dave serves as the COO for Good Intentions Counseling Service, a behavioral and mental health agency in Seattle, focusing on improving the mental health of BIPOC community members. So without any further delay, I'd like to welcome Dr. Dave Hester. Hey, Dr. Dave, how you doing today?
Hey, Dylan, glad to be here. Thanks.
Awesome, man. It's great to connect, man. I love the areas that you play in. There's the technology and the well-being and the positive psychology. Could you just? I'd really love to start this off by kind of getting to know like what initially got you into this space of what the well-being and also the technology pit. I'd love to hear a bit of your origin story.
Sure. So it would definitely have to start with my love of popular culture, media, superheroes, comics, anime, manga. All of that seriously influenced me in that there was this view of this future where we can manipulate how we use our neurochemicals to maybe calm down or even jazz ourselves up, using specific nodes that we really didn't even have any idea of back in the 60s and 70s. And when comics started to run to their golden age. So my origin story starts around the age of 5. I watch popular culture, Doc Brown from Back to the Future, and I am just floored at how much he's able to build and create out of nothing. I mean, he used bananas, for example, to power the DeLorean. Let's be real about this. So that influenced me to start to look to see how can we enhance our capabilities as humans? How can we reach like new heights? How can we even maybe create superpowers? And then to fast forward to 2013, I read a book by Ramez Nam called, forgive me, I'm losing the title at the moment, but it was influenced kind of by Neuromancer. I don't know if you're familiar with that tech. So it was Nexus. That's what I'm thinking of. The title is Nexus by Ramez Nam. And in it, he talked about building this pharmacy or building this kind of mental pharmacy, basically a way to turn people into superhumans and be able to process cognitive information, connect with each other seamlessly, like just through thought. And that it excited me to see some of those science fiction come to science fact. So fast forward 2 years later, it's 2015, and I am introduced to Dr. Jeffrey Martin and Nicole Bradford at the TransTech Consortium, I guess you can call us. And from there, it just grew. So that's kind of where my origin story started, with popular culture and wanting to see some of those new things come to fruition.
Oh man, that's awesome. Yeah, there's that whole there's an effect that for me personally, the 80s culture had on me. I remember being a young kid and coming across the hoverboard from Back to the Future 2, and then them announcing that it's a real thing. And then I got mad obsessed with magnets. And I'd go to the library, back in the day we had a library, you'd go and you'd look at books and stuff. And I remember trying to make my own hoverboard, and I took a bunch of magnets and put it inside a little card container. And I'd put them on, and I had my fingerboard, and I'd surf around on my fingerboard. I always wanted someone to take a bunch of magnets and put it in a skate park, just so that we could have the actual hoverboard. It's but there's something to this thing where fantasy or entertainment sells us this sexy dream that then technology has to live up to. And we're forever trying to make the DeLorean, the hoverboard, the all these different gadgets and gizmos that look so cool in the movies, but it just takes time for the technology to catch up. Is there one piece of like tech that you wish that you saw when you were a kid that you're waiting, wishing, hoping is going to come true?
Man, there's so many pieces, but for me, it's teleportation. Transferring matter from one place to another. I was a big fan of the Next Generation, TNG, Star Trek,
Yeah.
and I love the holodeck and what it could do. So it's a mixture of, for me, there's actually two. It's a mixture of teleportation
Yeah.
along with a true blue holodeck. Although I want to say Vulcan Industries, I think that's their name out here in Seattle. They're getting close to that. They
Mm.
have it out here at the Mopop, kind of a full immersive, almost holodeck style um, ride. It is you're playing with weapons and going through zombie hordes or whatever. But I would love to have seen a real holodeck because there's so much therapeutic uses that we can find for it to be able to step into a different time and completely embody, feel, smell, taste, all of the senses. I also think it's a great way to increase empathy,
Hmm.
across nations. How cool would it be to step into the you know the mind, the not the mind, but the area of someone living in Japan and in Tokyo, and get that culture just kind of washing over you.
Man, I totally agree with that. And there's magic in it. I had a magic moment a while ago. I was at this conference, and SIGGRAPH, you're familiar with SIGGRAPH?
Hmm.
So there was this Japanese dude who was just sitting down with his back to me, and there was like this large box in front of him, and he was right, and it was one box here, and to the left it was another box, and I go to sit down, and he looks at me and says, "Do you want to have a seat?" Not in English. He's like motioning me. I was like, "Okay," and so I go to sit down, and this was one of those crazy technologies, and it relates to what you're talking about. Is I saw a have you seen those ultra senses, those ultra haptics that they use sound to conduct sensation? So it's a little tiny speaker, and it sends it out, and it'll pulse hit you, and it feels like it hits you. So you can send out
Wait,
a little.
is that the work by David Eagleman?
I don't know if it's Dr. David Eagleman. It's called, I think it's called Ultra Haptics, and it's basically it's these little speakers that and what they
Mhm.
do is they put them in an array, a row of them, right? And then you can like set them off in a sequence, and it feels like something's like walking on your hand or something like that, right? And so,
Mhm.
but they're like low fidelity, right? Like super screen
Right, right.
door, a couple across. So and this was years ago, he put them inside of a box, right? So like on the edges, tops and bottoms like this, right? But you could put your hand through the center. So it's just the outside piece. And there was two of them. And so he goes sit down, and he takes like a little red ball, and he puts the red ball inside of the box. And on my side, there's the Pepper Ghost effect that shows the hologram of that there. And then he goes, touch it. So I reach out to touch the ball, the hologram ball, with my finger, and I go to poke it. And when I go to poke it, the hologram ball moves because it sent a signal to the real ball to move that way by using the ultra haptics. And so I was moving the hologram ball, and the real ball was moving. And then he stuck out his hand, and he's like,
Fascinating.
"Dorusu," nice to meet you, or something. And I was like, "Oh," and I
Right,
went to
right.
touch, and it wasn't perfect, but I could feel the touching, and I just had this like urge to like reach out and touch his face. I was like, "Come here, you!" I wanted, but like it was such a weird sensation, but it was a combination of the hologram and also the ultra haptics, and it was like a screen
Yeah.
door. I'm like, man, if they get this thing down to a tight resolution like you do on like a screen, where instead of it just being these big kind of beep beep beeps, you're actually able to like hug a loved one, or like see them, or
Wow.
kiss them, or any of that stuff. It was so powerful. It's not perfect, but man,
But
it's
it's moving towards the right direction of,
yeah.
man.
So those types of technologies that makes you feel oddly more connected, and there's like this shared sense of magic. That's what I think is really cool about these different
Hmm.
the holodecks and these other ones. There's like this magic that makes you have this shared moment with someone else that makes you giddy, that makes you want to be able to just like celebrate that moment. Like, and you said something really interesting, because you're like, I want the holodeck, and then the things I don't normally hear is like, imagine what you could do for therapy. Your brain went right into the direction of actually helping people, right? Versus, porn or anything else that is a typical like
which is
top
big
level,
now.
which is huge in here, and it's fully alive, and it is one of the driving engines of technology. But let me ask you, how would you like to see like this cutting edge technology? Like, in what ways would you like to see this type of therapy be used? Like, could you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I am EMDR trained as well as cognitive behavioral therapy. You name it, for the most part, I've explored it. And some of these are really good, especially when you talk about talk therapy in conjunction with medication, are really helpful for people who have challenging disabilities as well as developmental disabilities. But for me, I see that using like short, quick, and purposeful tactics, like pairing EMDR in a holodeck, could radically change our circuitry, radically change our brain, because the way EMDR works, and EMDR is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, just in case anyone wants to look it up. And I love what Dr. I believe his name is Andrew Huberman, what he's putting out around this is really impactful. So to answer your question, I see that really any of the therapies, maybe other than the Freudian stuff, not really big on Freud, but other than that, we can roll out different therapies, and heck, we can even mix them with experiences using psychedelics, using LSD for soldiers who are having challenges with PTSD. One of the lovely things I like about EMDR is if you imagine a memory, terrible memory, just being a node in your brain. Imagine pulling that node up, accessing it, looking at it, but instead of sending it back in, feeling worse than you were before, or feeling like you're still in it, imbuing it with love, or imbuing it with, it's okay, or I made it, or I'm safe, something that makes you feel secure, and then reinserting that node, so that now when your brain's running that circuit, when it's starting to remember those things, it passes through that, you can call it a love circuit if you want to be cheesy like me, but it passes through that. And pairing, let's say, a holodeck with these therapies in a therapeutic setting, as well as nootropics. I mean, there's so many options that you can use pairing together from a therapeutic sense to enhance well-being. And my whole shtick is that times are changing. We're not changing fast enough. We are not evolving as fast as our technology, as fast as these algorithms that we're slowly losing control of. How do we set ourselves up to be better in the future? And that's something that I'm really interested in, is how do we create these next level humans? And I'm not talking about these stereotypical transhumanists that are superior than others, or want to take over the world, but I'm saying, how do you prep someone who's going to be looking towards going to Mars? Like who does that? That no one can relate to that. No one can say, hey, this was something that I planned for. No, you weren't born on Mars. Like, just the travel alone is going to be challenging from a psychological standpoint. So the holodeck and therapy as well, mixed with all of those other interventions, can be helpful to protecting us on this journey and preventing any type of mania, madness, or just loneliness that happens when people are secluded. So it's all interconnected, I see.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things there. I mean, EMDR is a very interesting topic. I've tried it a couple times for myself, and I just ran, because I also run. I teach people how to build VR and do things like that. I just ran an online 5-day challenge teaching people how to build transformative virtual reality. And the winner from the challenge actually was with a EMDR idea. And so he's looking to figure out, can he make it? What does it look like? He's going through the process of like, oh, I've got this idea. Now, how do I bring it into fruition? So he's working on it in the background because he's had some own personal experience. I don't know the actual science behind it. and I have bro science in my head of what it could be. But I am not a trained professional in this area. But my only thoughts when going through is it almost feels like, and this is just my own interpretation of it. And I am not a doctor, nor do I play one on TV. But when you're focusing on that negative thought and you're moving your eyes in that certain pattern over and over again, it's almost like massaging a knot, but that knot is some sort of trauma in your brain. And by moving those eyes, and the eyes are connected to the brain, you're loosening up that knot and you're desensitizing it the same way you would desensitize it through cognitive behavioral therapy or whatever else. I don't actually know the science, but that's what it feels like what's happening with me. Do you know anything about what's going on? So I don't speak out of turn.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, I like your description. Your description that's similar to what we use whenever we're introducing people to this style of therapy. And that is, imagine you have this challenge or you have these thoughts that come up or this experience. Let's just call it trauma. It's because what it is at its core, EMDR is trauma-informed care. And so it is connecting those nodes. Just think about your brain as being actually two people inside of you working together to control what you perceive as you. We can get into the non-dual and what is self. And
we will.
But if you regard yourself as an I, for this being, as I sometimes say, then there's two hemispheres that are working together in conjunction. And the corpus callosum, basically, those are like the nodes that are hyper-connected between the two. So when you're switching, when you're going back and forth, you're, like you said, you're almost massaging this trauma center, especially when you bring it up. And then you're creating a felt sense of security. Mm-hmm. And so when you go back into it, or when that trauma comes up, there's less like hopelessness, or there's less feelings of just overwhelm or sickness, whatever the trauma was. But your description is similar to what I do. I kind of like to almost make it a game. The gamification of EMDR is also super fun. It's like the more you do it, the faster it is. There's different forms. There's ATIP, which is kind of a quick one. And I think that it's important for some of our first responders to have this in their pocket.
Really?
For people who are, I completely believe. So, because could you imagine being, in a traumatic event, let's say a shooting, and right on you have first responders coming in, police, paramedics, whoever's showing up, and they have this in their pocket, meaning that they have this tool that can help you to kind of reach a stable place, regardless of the level of trauma that you've been through. But overall, it's a fun way to play with your, I call it the neuron farm, which is what some people consider, I like to call it our neuron farm, our brain, which again, there's more in our stomach than is in our brain. It's a total another thing. As you can see, I sometimes hinge on the squirrel kind of ADD. I think about a lot of different things at the same time.
Me and you're gonna chase each other up and down the tree all day, man. This is where we're going. I'll slap in with you. So okay. So right. You have this neuron form. You're crossing over, and so you're talking about this ATIP. I'm not familiar with ATIP. It sounds, you said it's like a quick access EMDR kind of thing. Is that?
Yeah. So the thing about EMDR that's important to remember is that it should be paired with a trained professional, and usually over a period of time. It's much shorter than cognitive behavioral therapy, as far as the overall timeline. But what ATIP does is it's pretty much like I guess you could say a quick reference, because you're only doing you're setting in a safe space, you're doing the processing, going back and forth, and then you're checking on your SUDS. SUDS is basically a scale for the level of disturbance that you have. And as that disturbance lowers, that's when you've reached like a place where you can process, or you can pretty much go on with this trauma. It's about incorporating it. But so ATIP's kind of like a quick reference guide.
Got it. And you said something that I've heard this spoken a lot, but I still don't fully understand the actual definition behind it. When people say the word trauma informed, or the words trauma informed, right? Like, what is that? How does that what does that actually mean? Trauma informed, is that? Because I understand that people have trauma. I know that there's the situations, but how would you describe trauma formed to someone who doesn't fully understand the term?
So I want to shout out my partner and CEO,
Mm-hmm.
Phil Carr, over at Good Intentions Counseling.
Yeah.
He's taught me the I guess you could say the true meaning of trauma informed. And what
Uh-huh.
that means is that you're approaching it from a space where someone is in dire need, like they're in a desperate space for help, stabilization, security, safety, and trauma informed just means that it's been tracked through the research to support PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, and other trauma related disorders. So
Mm-hmm.
it is informed by what it's serving as well as the intervention that's being used to alleviate or help support people who are dealing with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of gave me that overview, and I was blown away at how much. I mean, we're dealing with so much trauma from
Yeah.
different things that we're not even aware of. From my perspective, speaking from an African American male standpoint, there's trauma from years and years of injustice. There's
Yeah.
trauma for women. Like I couldn't even imagine how it would feel to be a woman to know you're walking outside, you're just trying to have a good time, and there's these dangers just lurking
Yeah.
around the corner with these lecherous intent. So trauma kind of speaks to all of those things that can basically hijack our system and put us into a fight or flight, or whatever response we're going to do. And I think the most important thing to think about trauma is that if you're engaging in those circuits too long, you can burn yourself out, like
Mm.
literally. Firefighters have a high level of this where they're constantly, overwhelmed by just the amount of cortisol and all that. I call it the amped up chemicals instead of the feel good chemicals you get when you get to flow. But those amped up chemicals, you keep going, you keep going. By the time they're done, by the time they are retired, it's it's really rough, And I'm a
Yeah.
son of a service member, so I have direct experience from someone who has been in combat, dealt with the ridiculousness that is war, and then have to
Yeah.
come back to a normal life.
My father was also in a war, or the war, and yeah, there's definitely things that linger on, but it's interesting because we have these traumas that happened, and then we have these survival patterns that allowed us to survive, but then they don't
Hmm.
serve us anymore. And so, like, one of the biggest challenges you have is letting go of those survival patterns, and actually convincing your mind you're in a place not of scarcity or danger, but of actual abundance and safety. Like, what are the ways that you've seen that helps people actually shift that mindset, right? To release those traumas and to heal those wounds and to shift that mindset into abundance, or where they don't feel like they're in danger and the world's a threat and everything's against them. I mean, I know it's a big question. It's like, just give me the answer to all of mental health, please.
Yeah,
And just
absolutely. I keep it in
you
my
could put
back
that,
pocket.
if you could keep it under 60 seconds, I'd really love to share it across TikTok. No, I'm just if you have like, no, I mean, it's a hard question, but it's something to think about, and it's an interesting way that the body, what above all else, wants to survive, but then it
Yes.
creates things that makes our life not enjoyable. And so, do you have any thoughts around how to shift those things across?
Yes, many. So these are all these are all just random ideas by some guy. So just take
Yeah,
it as that.
that's right.
Random ideas
Yeah.
from some guy. Always research, question everything. That's what
Yes.
I'll lead off with.
Caveat.
Um, yep, nice caveat there. First thing
Mhm.
is contemplative practices. I'm really big on that. Contemplative practices can be just regular prayer, whatever religion that you
Mm.
may be a part of, or even if you're not a part of a religion and you are spiritual. There's so many sects, between religion that you can just lump them all together and say a spiritual practice. But a contemplative practice also allows you to reflect. But first, staging that contemplative practice with a bit of safety, breathing. You can also do grounding exercises. These are great ways to know the kind of I like to think of it like being a tree. You want to root yourself where you are so that when the wind blows, because it's going to, it's not going to knock you over. And when you do that, you can engage in these practices. You have loving kindness, especially for some of these traumas that are self-inflicted. Sometimes it's hard to forgive ourselves for what we've
Yeah.
done. So that's one. Another one is I'm a real big proponent on using technology to help. So if you are trying to track, your anything, your heart rate variability, your, tracking EEG, using EEG or whatever, all of those are great options to know where you are, to kind of get a personal baseline when you're working through that. Another one is transcranial direct current stimulation. I love using devices like that, just kind of zapping the brain a little bit. And
I'm not actually familiar with that one. I know the EEGs and what is trans. I think I've heard of it. So do you put electrodes on the brain? What happens? I don't actually know.
Yeah, TC, DS, or DCS. Yeah. So what it is I'm trying to think of the only commercial item I can think of that I know. Well, one is Think. All right, there we go. THYNC. I'm not sure where they are now as far as if they're continuing to build or not, but I have had some experience with them. And what they created was just a small electrode that goes just right over here. It's near part of your adrenal glands, and you can use it to kind of stim yourself either into a calm state or even stim yourself to boisterous energy. And that's one way you can do it. Some people use direct electrodes. I've connected with other people who have even posited that using ultrasound is better than TCD, than transcranial direct current stimulation. Ultrasound, which I've tried. I did a quick test run at the Transformative Technology Lab a few years ago, and I mean, it blew my mind away. It kind of knocked out. First, it knocked out that ego, that self-talk, that thing that's always chatting at you, who's kind of driving. It seems like it knocked that out, but then it allowed me to kind of go deeper and work on some things that I haven't really approached or knew how to work through. So there's a couple there. Of course, talking to someone. I want to add that talking to someone is one of the most underrated ways to get yourself at, or as I professionally will say, is a great way to unfuck yourself. Like you can,
the technical term.
Yeah, the technical term. We'll coin that. All my academic people are looking at me like, "What are you doing?" But anyway, it's a great way because when you're connecting with someone, there's just, I mean, we're doing it right now. We're connecting, we're looking at each other, we're talking. Of course, we're in different locations, so some of the cues that I may have been able to pick up on in person, I'm not able to. Whether it be smell, sensation, heat, but most of the other things do translate through technology. But of course, it all barrels down to our voice and us ridiculously trying to put our thoughts into this thing called language. And so, I think that talking to people is definitely an underrated tool.
It's vastly underrated and also incredibly difficult in the terms of, it's like, how do I get in shape? Diet and exercise, right? And it's like diet and exercise. Like, okay, yeah, got it. Okay, well, I'm feeling lonely and isolated. How do you have a deep conversation with people and do it on the reg? But the only issue is that, like, people, I said this before, but like, people crave deep conversations, but they greatly fear being vulnerable. You know what I'm saying? And that's a really hard thing for people to do. It's like everybody wants everyone wants to have this like head above water, keep it shallow, but they don't want to. But what they want is below there. What advice would you give to people that maybe are afraid to open up, that because what you're talking about is conversations versus like, how's the weather?
Not topical, right?
Yeah. So how would you get people who maybe, and like they have that life of quiet desperation, that they want to connect, they don't know how, they feel like there's a barrier between them? Is there any advice or tips or tricks or things you would give to somebody that wants to open up and actually kickstart one of these deep conversations?
Oh yeah. I would say find the common value. You know, when we did math, we learned common denominator, and we all have this common denominator that we tend to ignore. That being,
Mhm.
we're all the same species. We're all human for the most part, unless you're talking to a chat bot. But that's a different thing. But we're all human. So starting there
Mhm.
and even looking at the other people that you're looking to connect with, knowing that at one point that person was a baby, and also at one point that person will die. Like that's just what's going to happen. It's
Yep.
kind of a weird way to look at it, and that can open up some doors for people. But what it does is it shows you what is real, or what is this perceived reality that we are computing with our senses every day. And when
Yeah.
you want to talk to somebody and you're not feeling like you can be open with them or that you can be truthful, just know that what you say, is a part of you, but it doesn't define you. And it doesn't mean that what you say is I mean, it's going to be, of course, if it's on the internet, it'll be out there forever, but you can change. So one thing to keep in mind is that where you are now is not where you always have to be. And if you are a person who has challenges connecting with people, the proverbial introvert, connecting with other introverts may be a good starting point. And I know some people may say, well, that's kind of counterproductive. But if you think about it, that's finding the common denominator. That's finding a commonality that someone can connect with. Oh, you
Mm.
like to, sit with the blinds closed and wrapped up in a blanket? I do too. It's a great starting point to have a deep conversation with someone. And
Yeah.
the vulnerability, it's hard to teach that. It's almost like swimming in a sense. If you didn't really know how and you got thrown in, you have to just give up and give yourself to the water. Like even floating on your back, you have to give yourself to the water and allow yourself to be lifted by it. And that takes
Mm.
vulnerability. So that's another way to look at it, is how can you give yourself to, whatever goal you have. I want to exercise, or I want to talk to somebody long term in a long form conversation and grow from it. How can you just say, I can I can allow myself for a few moments to get to let go. And letting
Mm.
go is one of the hardest things that we can do, because we're told to guard things close to the hip. Keep it all above. Keep it
Yeah.
topical. Don't talk about things that are personal. And from a person who's constantly looked at media and taken some cues from media, as well as science, as well as spirituality, and some of the experiences I've had with indigenous communities, I've learned that I mentioned them earlier. Vulcan, Spock, for example,
Mhm.
is a great example of someone who their whole race, they suppress emotion, but it doesn't mean it's not there, but they suppress it. And it can be challenging for them when they get older because they haven't been able to process it. So how can you find that balance? How can you say, I want to be a Vulcan, but I want to be as cool as the captain, rather that be Picard or Shatner or whoever is out now, and find balance. So in all of this, if anyone takes anything from what I'm saying, the great place to start is to find balance. If that's
Mm.
your balance, if that's your personal balance on being vulnerable, your balance on what you feel comfortable with sharing, finding that balance is important to being open and willing to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting because I often think like superhero philosophy for me. I love superheroes. I still like my guilty pleasure is like on YouTube watching of like comics explained and other superhero stuff,
Oh,
and just going deep in the channel because
yeah.
I've so
No,
I just,
I was about to shout out other channels, but no need, no need, no need.
yeah, you can, if you're welcome to shout at any other channels, man. I'll any of that stuff is super fascinating to me. But I often think that like crutches turn into capes, and the things that you lean on over time, it becomes your superpower. But then at some point, you've got to look at that other piece of yourself, right? And so if you're all about feelings and you're all about that's great, but if you never develop the discipline to be able to level up on some core skill, and you've only relied on just being the likable person, that's not going to serve you. You got to have some other skills outside the bag, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Like I'm around a bunch of computer programmers who, because run a community around that virtual reality, we have one commonality, which is VR, and it's easy to talk in that space. But outside of that bubble, it's a very difficult thing. And so it's like you need both. You need to have that deep setted skill, but then you need that well-roundedness as well. And that's not it's not easy, because otherwise you have this missing gap, and unless you duct tape somebody else to you, Siamese can join twin, and you're like, okay. And that's kind of what a company is a little bit, as a giant entity. So let me ask you this: in terms of superhero like philosophy, right? You said you looked at that. You look at anime. You look at these other things. Like, what do you think about all of this stuff? What makes it so appealing to us? Like, why is it we're so into? Because like I saw the Goku shirt you're rocking. I was like, yeah. I was like, I remember Adult Swim when I was a kid, and Tsunami and all that stuff. But what about that? Why do we love superheroes and animes and all that culture?
So, man, first thing I'll say is we love it because it's story. Story is important to our lives, even though I'm going to kind of slightly contradict what I'm saying here by saying this, but when you can release your story and release your ego and all of the things that come along with your story, that's a gratifying and expanding thing to where you can reach a higher level of well-being. And I'm speaking of just some things I've learned from my travels, so to speak. But on the other side, I believe that story drives us, because when you are having a conversation with someone, long form, similar to what we're doing now, the stories that you tell, the stories that I tell, and that we reciprocate, they change us. We learn, we grow. And so story has been important since the beginning of time. That's how we pass on information. We fit it into a story. And then it also goes back to Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. I think that we really have undervalued the importance of wrapping message in story, and then putting it out so people can consume it almost unknowingly, and then taking away from that a process to grow, to learn, to fight through those challenges. So I really think that story, and then of course it's big business. It's money, so it's everywhere. It's Disney's bought Marvel, blah. But anyway,
they know how to take good stories, man. Like Marvel was struggling for a while. They did the longest 26 movie arc of like character development and just crushed it. I mean, they did a great job, and DC struggling. They're trying to they're on like the crash diet of movies. You know what I'm saying? Like they're trying to make it work by forcing it along. But bringing it back, you said something that was interesting I want to touch on. You said that one of the best ways is stories drive us, but one of the best things that you could do as a person is to let go of the stories and let go of that stuff. And you said on your journeys, I'm not going to dive into what journeys you're on and what realities you were in. So we'll skip that for the moment. But I want to focus in on this. When you're talking about letting go of stories, can you tell me a bit more of what stories, how you let me go, and if you have any types of examples that we can kind of grab onto, that would be helpful.
Sure. I'm going to try my best to explain this, because it's really tough when you reach some levels of whatever you want to call it. There is actually a term that call it. Dr. Jeffrey Martin titles it as persistent non-symbolic experience. It's the way that it's a fancy way of saying like equanimity or positive well-being, kind of that upper echelon level of being. And I learned a lot from him, and also going through his finder's course, and that helped me to uncover and break away from some of those stories. So one example of a story that I broke away from was that there was a story that built up over time, as a teenager, that whatever project I was associated with was doomed to fail. And that was my story. If I'm on the team, if I'm on the basketball team, we're not winning the championship. If I'm on the debate team, we're not going to win the regionals. And this story became embedded in my interactions, in how I showed up for people. And so once I was able to, through practice, again, I'm using positive psychology, using contemplative practices, meditating, mixing in technology to kind of get an idea of where I am each time I'm doing it. And once I was able to reach a point where uh, Dr. Martin kind of titles it buckets. If you could think about bucket 1 through 4, and
Mm,
bucket 4 is like complete equanimity. You have no agency. The world's just unfolding in front of you. Life is just kind of happening rather than um, you being like a cause and effect cog in that wheel. Whereas to fast forward to bucket one is, think of it as everything's going to be good. Everything's fine. Not just fine, everybody says that, but everything's good. I feel good. And even if it's not good, it's going to be okay. And so when things come in, negative stimuli, when you get hit with a negative comment on Twitter or something like that, rather than internalizing it and it becoming an emotional blow up for you, you're able to acknowledge it, almost step back from it, see it for what it is, and then move it away. Like I use this thing, uh, uh, which is kind of like, it's kind of like taking a phone app. We all have phones. We all use apps.
mm-hmm.
Imagine like a negative thought or a negative story that you have of yourself. And what happens is when you're engaging, that story pops up, just like any type of app that you use when you launch it. It pops
Mm,
up. So imagine hitting your menus option, swiping it away. That's kind of what I do. Is I just swipe. It's gone. And
mm,
and I do that with thoughts too. So when you talk about story, thoughts are mixed up a lot in story. They creep up, they kind of pop up and tell us this is what you should do, or if there are those little whispers, this is what you should say next, or you're not going to do this,
yeah,
you're not going to be as good as you could have been.
yeah,
And it's hard sometimes to not listen to them
yeah,
because we identify with them. We're like, that's me speaking.
yeah,
But is it though? Is it,
yeah.
is it not your mom? Is it not your coach? Is it
It's
not the society speaking to you? And
yeah,
that's all story.
yeah. I'm gonna make a note. I thought this was so funny. I'll tell you what I'm thinking right now is that like almost what you're describing to me is what I feel like when you're telling me about the operating systems and the stories. Almost like it's not necessarily the app that pops up, but it's the thing that pops in. It's the pop up notification to the app. It's like notification, you're inadequate. Notification, you're cursed, right? And you're like notification. It's like this pop up, and you're like it's you didn't invite it. You didn't go out and search for it. You didn't decide to open it up. It's a pop up notification, and then you just go swipe gone, right? But you can go. Oh yeah, you're right. I am cursed. You can go. I'm cursed. You click on it and you open it up and you look at it. Go. Oh yeah, I haven't spent a lot of time in here lately, right? And you just like marinate inside that app for a while. But that's what you're right. It does feel like pop up notifications that pop in your brain. They even like you get those thoughts like my buddy just had a baby. It's like not even like 2 weeks old, and
Nice,
I went
congrats.
to go hey, I was so happy, but he's like, hold my baby. The baby's this big. I'm like, no. I don't want to I just picture dropping the baby, knocking the baby. So I was like, and then there's all of this shame and guilt. I was like, no, but it was just all these thoughts that you're coming in that I couldn't, I couldn't be like, everything's going to be okay. Even if I drop the baby, it's going to be okay. Like, no, there's all this thing, but it's amazing to see how I don't know where those come from, those conditions of those pop-up notifications for your brain. But how do you is there a way that you swipe those things away? Is like, do you positive self-talk over them? Do you just clear your
Hmm.
mind? Do you pinch yourself? Do you club a baby seal? Like what is it that you actually do to actually
Whoa.
get no, sorry, pop-up notification, just checking. No, what do you like?
Right.
What do you do? What do you do to swipe that away?
So there's many things I do, and what I like to tell people is do what works for you, but
Mm,
try everything.
mm,
Nothing, everything is permitted. But try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But for me, what I do is I kind of just talk to myself and I say, hey, this being or this person who thinks he is David and is experiencing David
Mm-hmm.
is saying that this pop up is true. And then I'll ask, can that be argued? And it's like, oh yeah, that can definitely be argued. That's not true. And then okay, is that real? Well, that thought of me, and I'm gonna use you for example, of
Yeah.
me dropping the baby, I can look and say, where am I presently? I'm not holding the baby. The baby's not on the floor. It hasn't happened. I'm here right now.
Mm.
So there's one way, and then of course a fun way to do it is, and I learned this from Dr. Martin, is to kind of say cancel, cancel. It's the same thing as taking off taking off the app, but I use cancel cancel a lot as well. When those nasty thoughts jump in,
Uh,
it's just like, nope, cancel that. Don't need that. Screw it. Nope, I'm not having it.
so you
And
mentally
it's
say,
not.
you verbally or mentally say cancel, cancel. Is that what I'm hearing you say? Or like
Yes.
I don't.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So it comes in and it's like don't want that. Cancel, cancel. You just whoop, and you just like swipe it out.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
okay.
it takes, like anything else. Don't expect for it to work on the first time. It takes practice,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we have to be patient with ourselves to know that it's going to take practice to get a hold of this ridiculously growing and uh, just huge machine. And I hate to call our brain a machine, I know, but things that we have, that's all we can really compare to at this moment, which is similar. But if it's going to do what it's going to do, it's going to pop
Mhm.
up with thoughts. And I actually learned this from my time, at Life Guides, where I was connecting with someone, and I was using the service. I'm one of
Yeah.
those hair club for men, and I'm a
Mhm.
client. I'm one of those
Yeah.
people who tries to who make sure to use the service that I'm in.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what I did was, I was having these thoughts around grief, and I was like,
Mhm.
hey, I'm really feeling like I could have done more, surrounding this grief. And she reminded me, she was like, hey, what about that tool that you used? That tool that you taught me was really helpful. And I was like, you're right, and I went to try it, went to do it more often. But I'm saying all that to kind of sum up and say that it takes practice and it takes community. You have to sometimes bounce ideas and stuff off of each other. You have to work with each other to try to build.
Yeah. It's funny there when you're saying that it's funny when friends show you things that you showed them and like hey take your own advice eat your own dog food like that's funny because it happens there's like a piece that like you have like sometimes it's a bitter pill to swallow you're right yeah forgot about that one fell out of my back pocket but the one other thing that you that's interesting on that is sometimes I like if you're sad or if you're depressed, there's an inclination or desire to want to listen to depressing music, to want to beat yourself up. There's something about wanting to marinate in it, to open up that app and then just to dive into it and just lose yourself in that depression or that pain or the whatever you feel. There's like this victimy, it just feels good. Let me feel good kind of thing. And I think the hardest thing is to one recognize and then two state shift yourself out of there right like
Yeah.
to get out of that so if you find yourself starting to marinate in some sort of sedation or victim mentality or anything these other things that come up that don't serve you have you seen any effective ways of doing state shifts and be able to shift you out of one of those funks into something else
Oh, most definitely. One
yeah
really good way to do it is to get an expansive view, like
mm-hmm.
go outside, or if you have a view at your window,
Mm-hmm.
go to your window and just have an expansive view where, again, kind of goes back a little bit to EMDR. You're kind of doing that shift a little bit. You're looking at the trees, you're looking at the skyscrapers if you're there. If you live in the country, you're looking at the birds, the clouds, whatever. But you have this expansive view. And I have this thing that I like to also kind of play around with my family, with myself as well, when I need a state shift, is to almost have a comparison with an inanimate object that's been here much longer than us. So follow me. You're
Uh,
like, where the hell is this going?
I'm buckling up. Let's do this.
All right. So if I need a state shift, for example, I'm feeling down and I'm wanting to engage in some depressive music so I can feel more into it because, again, that's an ego thing. I want to feel what I feel. And you should feel. You should not repress it or, or suppress or even try to, act like it's not there. You got to acknowledge it. But at the
Mm,
same time, there's a part of our ego that wants to identify with it. Remember, just a moment ago, we were talking about connecting with people, and we're talking about
mm,
that bottom line. That's that
mm.
identification. When you could see yourself in someone else, you can connect much easier. So when you're in a negative state, you're wanting to identify with those lyrics that are speaking to you about what you're experiencing. So one way
Yeah.
that I try to shift out of that is I get an expansive view, and I live here in Seattle, so I have a view of Mount Rainiers, and so I'll kind of look at it in this expansive view, kind of look around, and I'll look at the mountain, and I'll say that mountain's been here for thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. Does it give a fuck about me feeling bad about this? And usually the mountain doesn't answer because it doesn't. And so when it doesn't, it's kind of like, wow, this thing has been here through massive turmoil, you know,
Yeah.
eruptions, hurricanes, whatever environmental things that have happened, and time, and
Yeah.
they're still there. They're still there. So
Yeah.
I kind of look at that and I say, hey, if that mountain can still be there, I can be fine. I can be cool.
That's super cool. What you did there, which I thought was really interesting, at least my own take on it, is that the the ego likes to be everything. It likes to be the center of attention. It likes its opinion to be true. It likes
Mm-hmm.
its thoughts to be real. It likes it to be right. It likes to be like my pain is my pain and I deserve it and it's mine because and it's all about me and no one understands my pain. That it becomes that all-consuming thing. But what you did right there is you took yourself, you got out of that gravity well of the ego self, and you said, you know what? You're not everything. You're this small little thing. And I'm going to show you with my eyes. And then I'm going to show you with the story. And I'm going to show you with the truth, saying that mountain is a million times bigger than you are. And it's been here a million times longer. And how much do you really matter? Not at all. Not at all. And your ego's like, oh no, you're taking my power away. And it's a really interesting, at least it's my own interpretation of that, of how you shifted that. And actually, I think it's a really cool concept of like, oh no, I'm my depression is bigger than life. And then you went and anteed up on it. And I think that's a really cool thing. So you've been on this mission, from what I've seen, of taking these holistic, healthy, positive psychology practices and integrating them with technologies and bring them together. And could you talk to me a little bit about what's your holy grail with type of stuff? Like ultimately, what are you seeking to achieve, or what are you hoping that this technology is going to achieve by bringing these pieces together?
I'm going to shout out Ramez Nam again because he's been a really big inspiration for me. But my holy grail is for us to be ever so connected without the malicious intent, which I know if humans build it, malicious intent is going to be woven in it. So we have to weave that out consciously. We have to purposefully do it. So for me, it's that, like, creating that serenity package. Serenity package is a term in the Nexus trilogy, which allows a person to almost calm themselves instantly. Like basically, you just turn on the serotonin if you need to, turn up the dopamine. But of course, everything has a limit because we're human. If you overdo it, you're gone. But at the same time, my holy grail is creating something that connects us and supports us as a human race without bringing on the extra baggage that our ego has brought from thousands of years of experience. So, yeah, and ego, and I know that's a ridiculous thing to think about, but how do we create a positive state of well-being and enhance consciousness for our future without bringing all of the dogma and the judgment and the horrendous things that we've done to each other and to other beings. How do we do that? And that's kind of my long term.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I mean, what she says. I mean, it's really powerful. The challenge is that the ego keeps us alive, right? Fed and all that fun stuff. But at the end of the day, the fulfillment comes from the contribution and the connection and being of service and building things, that is of other people's purposes and other people's purposes, but for other people's benefits, and removing the ego, the malicious intent. Because I've seen a pattern that there's people that make principles. They're like, this is the principle, right? America, this is the principle about and then they make laws, and then other humans find ways to supersede the principles by twisting the laws, lobbyists and all those other types of things, right? And then you're like,
Right.
that's not by the letter of the law. And I think that's actually something that Scarlett Johansson just hit up Disney on. She just sued Disney because they said, oh, it's not a movie ticket proceeds. We're going to release it on this other thing. We'll go make tens of millions of this way. And so she said, hey, you violated the intention of the contract, the goodwill of the intention. And if you could only make that goodwill tangible, right, and say, but this isn't the actual ideals. That's what that weaving out that malicious intent, that the superseding of the principles by manipulating the system for the egoic gain. That's a tricky bit.
It's a tricky bit. I want to add there that our ego has a purpose. So I'm not saying destroy our ego. We shouldn't all be, in this ego state. And I'm also not saying that everyone would be, the world would be better if everyone was enlightened or reached this, heightened state of well-being. But I am saying that there's a balance that we could find where you can have that experience, that expansiveness, that willingness to let go of the ego, but then you can find a way to work within the world. And what you said, I'm glad you mentioned, what happened with, Scarlett Johansson, because that is indicative of a corporation, doing what they do. They're there to make money, and that's understandable. But at the same time, they're also there for story. So you see how there's this weird dichotomy that we have between the things that we want, the things that we need, and the things that we get. It's this weird thing. And I think as we're all communicating more, and as new people like Elon and creating was it Neuromesh, I believe.
Neuralink.
All of these things, Neuralink, that's it. Which is it's similar to a mesh. Neuralink is the title, but with things like that, there's other opportunities for us to even potentially review our dreams, check memories. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Black Mirror, but
the show?
The show, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It always starts out so great. It's
doesn't it? It's like
you're like, I'll take two of them. Give me.
I want to see what I did last week. I want to see that now. And then you think about it, and you're like, oh, do I want? And then that goes back to that vulnerability. Do I want people to see, what happened when I stubbed my toe? Like what curse did I say when I said that? And all of when you think about Black Mirror, those are stories, cautionary tales almost. Some people hate it. I love it because I believe what Black Mirror does is it pushes us forward in thinking about how we can get over some of these hurdles that are right in front of us. And that is the hurdles of mob justice, the hurdles of mass hysteria, the hurdles of people just wanting to hurt other people because they are hurt. And that's why it's important that we heal our trauma so that we don't want to have to inflict it. That kind of goes back to the music again. You're feeling bad. You're like, I want to listen to. I'm trying to think of a band that's sour, but I don't want to mess anybody.
Some emo music, some sad, depressing emo music, for sure.
Yeah, some super slow down tempo, 90s alt rock or something, And we want to get into that because it's feeding that ego. And we have to find a way to find balance. Balance is key, and we live in a place where things go to excess. Like in Black Mirror, Hated in the Nation is one of my favorite episodes because it shows just how much power we have with our comments,
Mm.
and how much also humans may not have been created, or we haven't even evolved yet to be able to absorb and process that many comments at a certain amount of time, even though the premise of that. Spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen it. Uh, you know, the, the bees are killer because the people made them.
Yeah. Okay. I think I've seen that episode. I'm trying to remember what episode that is. Is it there was the mechanical bees? Is that the one?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's either bees or no, they were bees. They were bees, which is super ironic that we're losing bees and they're making mechanical bees. Anyway,
Monsanto's.
Yeah. So yeah, basically what happened was someone had pissed another entity off, and so they got smeared online. And based on
Yeah.
how much online slander they got, how much people said, how many people voted to kill her or not, even though they thought it was just an online fun poll, that's actually what happened. They killed a woman just based off of people's perception of what they thought, even though they really didn't have a total look. And that's something I think that's important that we can always remember, is that even what you see, we think that that's everything. We think what we hear is everything, but there's so much more. We're so much more complex than that, and we
Yeah.
have to be a little more cautious with how much we judge people off of just what they see. So yeah, so people judging me for wearing a Goku shirt, take it easy.
I appreciate it. I enjoy looking back at my childhood and going, I don't know. I think in some ways there's certain like childhood memories like that give me strength. Like listening to that Rocky Balboa theme song. There's a bunch of different like
opposite,
you can use it as a fuel source. What you're talking about wanting to create this non-Black Mirror future, which is, they said, like culture or technology is a race between utopia and disaster, and that's kind of the things that we're trying to. And in a way, Black Mirror also kind of provides what are the different paths you can go down with this technology bit. What do you think is the biggest dragon that we faced or you faced in order to achieve your Holy Grail, which is creating these technological futures that are without egoic, malicious intent? Like, what do you think is the biggest dragon preventing that future from happening?
Wow. Money. And I mean that on both sides. Money can support creating it, but then when it's created, money can also potentially tear it down.
Yeah.
And it's not just, we don't blame money, but we blame our lust for money or our lust for more and control. So I think that our resources that we're putting towards certain things that are just unnecessary could be reallocated. And then also, I think one thing that could prevent us is who's writing the code. Who's creating these things. If we don't have a multicultural approach to creating new technology, we're creating technology for a certain sect of people, and those early adopters who match those certain sect of people it's going to be great for them. But then that leaves out a large amount of the rest of the population of the world. So I think money, as well as who's doing it, who's putting in on it, and what is your intention, what is your goal. Some people may be hired mercenaries. They just want to come in, write the code, get the money, head out. Some people may be purpose driven, like they are driven by change. Others may just be there for the ride because they think this is a cool idea. So it's really defining where you are and what you're really wanting to do, and then being upfront with that. I think being or communicating as effectively as you can and telling your truth is really important. If you're there just to watch the rocket ship ride, do that. If you're there to lead the rocket ship, try to be that, but don't fake it, because it'll show.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's you're right. Money is just it's a fuel source that can get you to where you need to go in either direction. And then the problem is that it can stack in one direction. Another, I know, like Walt Disney was trying to make Epcot as an experimental prototype of the future. That was his goal. He's like, I see this future where we could all live together in peace and harmony. That was his goal. Epcot.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was designing an entire city. He was making an entire city. I mean, he changed the game every single time. He was doing animations, and then he did full feature films. They're like, that's impossible. He's like, I'm going to do amusement park. That's impossible. The next thing he's like, I'm going to make this city. The only problem, smoking, lung cancer, things like that, got him at 66, and he died. And so what happens when the dude who thought of everything died? They're like, what do we know? Amusement parks, right? And they fell back on what they knew, and so they made another amusement park. But he was trying to make a city, and then because he just kept trying to change the game. But same thing like Elon. I hope Elon lives for another 100 years and puts his mind in a robot or whatever. But
Right.
but like that's the thing.
Transfer that consciousness, Elon. Transfer that consciousness.
Yeah, we need fleets of Elon robots and put them in the T1000s. But no, it's important because humans are really good at hacking the game. Whatever game it is, they hack the game. And so if you say, okay, this is how you make $1, then they're going to hack the system so they can get all the money. And so it's like that you can say, how do we? It seems like that's the biggest thing is finding ways that you're talking about to make sure that we put the incentives in the right way that keeps us propelled in the right direction and keeps us all on course versus, the incentivization for deforestation or the incentivization for pollution. Or it's that incentivization that really screws us.
That's beautiful. What you just said. I wish that could be a bite. If we could make that the norm, where, okay, if you're here to screw over your partner so you can get $1, we don't want you. Why can't corporations back that up by standing for what they are, walk their talk, as they say? And so if someone is there and they know that they've been truthful, hey, I'm willing to screw over my friend over here so I can get $5. Okay, this person's not right for us, because taking what you like deforestation, for example. I was just recently watching some information on that, and I was blown away at how many people greenlit these things. Like, this is a good idea. Let's take away something that we know the earth needs because we need cows. I know we need to feed people. I'm not naive, but there's other ways, and or not just that. Let's take away all of this forest so that we can, I don't know. Let's make a Starbucks here. I know Starbucks is not doing it, so allegedly, So, but all of these are situations where someone greenlit and someone thought it was a good idea to do this. Same thing with pollution. I live in Seattle, but I'm from North Carolina and Jersey. You may hear a hint of an accent, but over in North Carolina, there was this large dump where toxic waste was put into the ground, and it ransacked the soil. And people living on this specific land, and again, these people living on this specific land were of the middle class African American community in the 1950s. Most of them, 20, 40 years later, got cancer. And so I thought about it, and I said, someone had to green light that. Someone had to say, this is a good idea to dump that. So how can we, hold people not only like that accountable, but how can we create a better system so that it incentivizes people who don't want to make that choice because they want to see future generations do better?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question. It's a good question to ask, because I think every quest starts with a question, and it's something to think about. So it's. Yeah, and maybe someone else that's listening to this will come up with a good answer for us, and we're just kind of kicking the can around a bit. But with that, yeah. Who else? Anybody want this? Anybody else want this buck? It's not gonna stop here. So no. What? So with that being said, what is there anything else you'd like to let people know about before you tell them how to get a hold of you?
Yes. I want to say, just from the deepest part of my heart, that everyone can do better and everyone can be better. And I don't know who may be listening and may need to hear that, but you can. And you've heard people say, be that change. So I really want to emphasize that we can be better humans, because truth be told, if extraterrestrials dropped in the house right now and they saw how we work, they'd probably leave,
Yeah.
because we may not always be the most hospitable people. So yeah, I would just encourage everyone to look within yourself, or this thing that you identify as yourself, and ask, how can I be better, or how can I be a better conduit of our future, because that's
Yeah.
really what we're all working towards.
Yeah. And if you do that, you will feel better. And then because you feel better, because you're doing better, you're going to be better. And then you're going to be able to kind of kick that virtuous cycle, moving in that direction. So that's beautiful.
And, yeah, and doing better doesn't mean you have to change the world. You can do better by, instead of always not holding the elevator, hold the elevator one time. You're doing better. Look at you. Look at you. You can do little things.
You
You
can
can
do it.
do
You
little
got
things.
Little things add up, man. And if people want to get a hold of you, find out more about you, how do they do that?
So I do have a LinkedIn. No other social media. But I do have LinkedIn. You can find me, David Hester Jr., on there. You can check out more about the organization that I'm championing right now, or the 3 organizations I'm championing, starting with lifeguides.com. We're a wonderful organization just looking to lessen the suffering of 1 billion people. Like, that's
Love
really
it.
our tagline. And we also want to shout out Good Intentions Counseling out here in Seattle. Is doing the good work supporting. You mentioned the term earlier, BIPOC, and that stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color, here in the area, especially the people who've been disenfranchised. And then I also want to just give a strong shout out to 2 people who've been really instrumental in teaching me and helping me grow as a human, and that's the leaders of the Trans Tech, Nicole and Jeffrey. So it's if you want to reach me, you can go to any of those sites. I have emails through there. If you want to email me directly, you can email me at drdhess@musingu.com. MUSING, the letter U.com.
Got it. Beautiful. Well, Dr. Dave, this has been incredible. I really appreciate you being on. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And thank you for coming on the show. And I will see you in another reality.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Take care now. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes of Reality podcast. Check out heroesofreality.com for more episodes. While you're there, you can also take the Heroes quiz to find out what kind of hero you are. Or, if you have a great story and want to be on the podcast, tell us why your hero's journey will inspire others. Thank you for listening. See you on the other side.